morning. Thank you for joining us today. We have an exciting lineup for you. Our topic is microlearning the fix you've been looking for? So our panelists today, we're doing this panel style. Our panelists are myself, Lydia Sani, who is one of the owners of Redwood Performance Group. We have with us Lee Downs, the Senior ID and Communications Specialist for Redwood as well. We also have Janine, Executive Producer of Keyring Media, and Craig, who is writer, producer, and new media creator. So as a team, we've all worked together on various projects and our own independent projects as well. And it'll be very interesting today to hear this team's take on microlearning and is it right for you? So next, we're going to look at our objectives, and we sent our objectives in our invitation. So basically, it's should you hop on the microlearning bandwagon? It's the big thing right now. Everyone's talking about it, and everyone's wanting to do microlearning. But before we tell you whether it's right or not, we're going to let you sort of sit through the seminar, listen, ask your questions, and then you can determine at the end if you think it's right for you. So we'll be covering topics like putting micro in your macro learning strategy. We're going to be looking at welcoming you to the video revolution. I'm sure everyone's heard about that. Why is micro learning and branching scenarios, why do they go together so well like peanut butter and jam? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of micro learning? And we'll talk to our expert panel here and get their takes on that. So before we continue, I question out to you, is anyone here already doing microlearning? So if you are, just please type it in the box. And I'm not seeing responses, so, oh, sorry, I am. There we go. So we have some people who are, some people are saying not very much. So hopefully after this webinar, we can get change your mindset and have you look at this. So what exactly is microlearning? And micro means that exactly. It's small. It's bite-sized pieces. It's a focused learning experience that people can do. How long is microlearning is another big question, because we've had people come up to us, clients come up to us and say they want to do microlearning and they have an hour worth of content. So we like to say microlearning bits should be 3 to 5 minutes. There's a lot of people who have different opinions on that, who say, no, you can go as high as 10 minutes. It's an individual preference. We feel shorter is better. So, so that's what we believe is shorter is best. So developing microlearning can be done in so many various formats as well. So you've got mobile apps, whiteboard animations, ebooks, micro lectures, podcasts, infographics. And two that we're going to focus on this morning specifically are going to be videos and branching scenarios. So that's our focus for today. And what we also want to do is, in our learning world, we all know that people forget about 80% of what they learn within 30 days if there's no reinforcement. And how do you get that reinforcement? So microlearning can be very sticky learning. And what we've been calling our term that we've been coining for years is learning that sticks, which is crucial in the whole experience. It's your ROI, correct? So Janine, you had a comment on learning that sticks?
Yes, I have, just to bring this home about content that will stick in your mind. If you take an HR scenario, for instance, where you want staff or employees to learn how to do something, you can tell them through documents, websites, reading articles, but to actually illustrate behavior can make a huge difference. So I've pulled up a video here.
Let's look at an example of how our actions impact others' perception of our professional credibility. In this scenario, we'll see John as he's completing his work. As you observe John, consider how you feel about the quality of his work. How would you evaluate his attention to detail, thoroughness, reliability, responsiveness, and overall competence?
Where the heck's that meter?
So, how's it going? Almost finished?
Yeah, pretty good. I just finished. Just got a couple of readings to test out before I go. If I can find my meter, that is. Oh. Ah. Here it is. Come on. Batteries are dead. You know what? It doesn't matter really. The tests are just a formality. It just gives me something to write on the service report.
Look, if you want me to go get batteries, I can get you some.
No, don't worry about it. Everything will be fine. Like I said, the tests, they don't really matter. I'm just gonna go power it up, and for the next couple of days, just keep an eye on it. You know, if you see or hear anything unusual, give me a call and we'll come back, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. For example, we did a while back for a major retail organization a series of little micro learning scenarios that taught different sales tips, sales skills, and the company wanted to see the effectiveness of it and wanted to measure the effectiveness of it. And what they did is they actually paired the learning with a mystery shopper program, and they had people go to the learning environment, to the actual retail environment, to speak to the reps, and they said that they could tell right away who had done the learning and who had not, just by the way they were able to hold that conversation. They were able to upsell, cross-sell, do all the things that were actually in the tips much better than those who had not done the micro-learning. So I'd like to actually now turn it over to Lee to talk to you about a practical approach.
Hello, everyone. So when we think about a practical approach, we think about using the learning to the best of what we can do. There's so many different ways to slice and dice it. So having intact modules, go and complete, sit here for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever. And we believe that virtually any type of training can be broken down into those snackable bites. Right now, and it really has shaped our thinking, and right now when we structure our courses, we think about the content in chunks or components. So what is the best component to impart the information? Is it a video? Is it an animation? Is it just text? How is this going to happen? Which means that the content can also be used outside of the course as micro-learning nuggets. And then when you have those nuggets, you've got your foundational pieces, then you start to continue to build on those nuggets. A few days ago, we presented a vision to a client for their Canada-wide training, and we put forward the concept of an ever-increasing library of resources geared to increase hard and soft skills and to have an impact on performance. So when you use microlearning, when do you use microlearning? Actually, anytime. It's perfect as a way to enhance formal learning, and we'll talk more about that later on, imparts soft skills, and it actually allows for behavioral change. And we all know that behavioral change is like the holy grail of culture and performance. I'm going to show you a communications model. And I've been using this for years now, and it's quite simple, and it takes a high-level change management approach to communications. You know, I bring it forward because communications in many organizations focus on awareness and understanding, the first two. You know, we see it, we know it, and then it stops there. So I find that a lot of training does the exact same thing. So, you know, formal training is great at getting people from we see it to we own it. And micro learning can actually target the commitment and saturation, and so that we can move people more directly from we see it, we know it, we own it, and we live it. And that's what behavioral change is all about. We live it. They have to demonstrate through their actions that they know what they're doing. And it can apply to soft skills, it can apply to hard skills, to compliance, anything. The next thing we're going to talk about is we promised you micro in your macro. And here's what it means. It is what it means, micro in your macro. So if you're going to approach and start focusing in on microlearning, don't do it without a larger plan. You need that macro. Otherwise, you're going to be scattered and running all over the place. It's try to have your formal learning needs sorted out, what your objectives are, for example, before you start running around creating microlearning nuggets, because even though they're smaller pieces, you need to have a strategy for them because you have a small amount of time in which to achieve an objective, whether or not you want them to perform differently or you want them to, communicate with their people differently. It's getting really focused down on what you're good at. You have to drill down to the micro level components and select those things that are critical to overall performance. And these are the types of things that are really ideal for microlearning. Now, Craig, I know you had been talking about a project you worked on, so.
Yeah, Craig Stevens here. Hello, everyone. I mean, we all have one of those projects where you walk in and you're tasked with teaching people, explaining to people how to operate a piece of machinery that you think, this is impossible. And so we were working for a pharmaceutical manufacturer, and the job was to help people understand how to operate a very large, by very large I mean it would fit in an airline hangar. The thing, you could barely see the end of it from the front of it. It was that big, and this machine manufactured and packaged drugs at the other end. They poured powder in at the beginning, and little packets of antihistamines came out at the end. It was crazy. And if you can imagine this thing, it's full of knobs and dials and switches and screens, and everything's pumping and going. And so the question was, oh my God, how can we make this really understandable and accessible for a learner? But when you look at a situation like that and you look at an overriding process, if you want, the macro of it, and then start breaking it down, what are all the micro elements involved? It really becomes quite simple. And in this particular situation, there might be 500 micro elements involved. But if you go through it, if you work with the subject matter experts and isolate those elements, and then you take it away and using your instructional design skills, put it in a way that people can understand it in formats that they can understand it. And in this particular case, video was really effective because we could just cover the operator and go through various steps and package it down into really digestible elements of communication that made it much easier for the learner to digest and work with.
Nice. So let's talk about quickly the 6 rules for microlearning. Number 1, it should support and reinforce formal learning. Microlearning should be available at the precise time it is needed. It should be short and engaging. It should use the right medium. So really, when you're looking at your content, is a video necessary for this? Or can it be an audio clip? Could it be an interview with someone? There's so many ways that you can think about it. It's easy to understand and retain, so don't get overly complex because there's only so much that you can impart to people within the 3 to 5 minute time frame. And it enables learners to act and practice. So there should always be some action item or whatever that is involved in the learning, particularly if it's going to address a performance issue. Now, Craig, you had a question.
If I could just, it wasn't a question, it was a comment on what you said. And when you talked about microlearning and all these different types of media that we can use, I think that's a really important aspect of it. Because basically people learn in different ways. We know this. I mean, that's learning design 101, right? Where some people are kinesthetic or visual or respond best through audio. And the beauty of microlearning is that you can take that into account. You can put a bunch of stuff together for your audience that might be a little blast of maybe a 3-minute podcast that might explain something. It might be as much as like just a simple image, a graphic image. It could be a 20-second video. It could be motion graphics, whatever you want to use. But the point of the whole thing is that if you reinforce on different levels on a continuing basis, you're going to make that learning be much more ingrained in the person and therefore much more accessible to a person. And that's our biggest challenge because I mean, we all know it ourselves, right? We do a course and wow, if you don't use it, if it's not reinforced 3 weeks down the line, it's gone.
Absolutely. And another point to that is that you have X amount of money in your budgets, in your learning budgets. Don't think that everything has to be, glossy video. Think about how to use what you have, or ways to stretch that.
Or things that are even in the public domain that you could reuse. There's a lot of learning that happens on YouTube. So it's really hard to answer the budget question, because it's as big or as small as you want it to be, and you work with what you have. There are a lot of different solutions, and a lot of them can be very cost effective.
Absolutely.
Now, there are a couple of examples here that, okay, sorry.
What we're asking you to type in right now is if you can think about what are some examples of great micro-learning that you've seen in the public realm that you have access to. Oh, we see lots of people typing.
We've got YouTube,
Do-it-yourself videos on
Yeah.
YouTube.
mm-hmm.
TED Talks. Oh, right. And you're absolutely right on that. They're extremely strict. So be wary of how you're using them. Any more? Oh, the Khan Academy lessons. Yeah, those are good too. Now, Craig, you had been talking earlier with us around a couple that you wanted to bring forward.
Yeah, well, it's more or less continues along the same train of thought that our guests are posting there. And that these days, I mean, we really live in an amazing age, because we have so many opportunities to learn through the internet, and a lot of that is done through microlearning. And there's some great examples. Duolingo it's great. It's packaged in a way that you can learn whatever language you want at whatever level you want, and you're constantly hit with your 1 or 2 minute or 4 minute lesson. Google Primer is great. It can give you lessons in tech and all that stuff at the speed and assimilation that you want to do. Lynda.com is really one of my favorites, and that again is sort of a macro thing broken down into micro lessons. And again, someone mentioned TED Talks. Well, they have TED in 3 minutes. If you just want a 3-minute blast of your daily TED, you got it.
And someone, Tanya has says, have employees create self videos, and those are great, little testimonials, little tips from employees. Why not? Learn from your peers. It's mentoring. It all fits in very well with the learning experience.
Right. And I noticed the comment around microsimulations, excellent, but also especially subject matter experts in your organization. And we'll touch on that a little bit towards the end when we wrap up and talk about the importance of that around what you need to have in place.
So now we would like to talk about the video revolution, and I'd like to turn this over to Janine, because she had some very interesting thoughts for us.
Yeah, so I think today, I think there's an expectation for video in just about every part of our businesses. And one of the things that it makes it particularly relevant these days is that the medium is the message, which is a Marshall McLuhan quote, which I think is particularly relevant because it's not so much about the content,
All
but
ages
the
and all
medium.
stages of life.
What I mean by that is that people are consuming content very differently. Yes, it's much shorter. And even if you look at 5 years ago, the content has shortened, and people will say to me all the time, how long should a video be? And it really depends on the objective of that video. Everything that Lee was talking about in content for microlearning relates directly to how you go about thinking about video. When you're talking about producing content from your experts on site, that's readily available, and your iPhone can shoot that. You do not need to hire professionals for every piece of content. You've just got to be aware of how you're using that content. So there's an expectation. Now, I will give one caveat, and this is my free advice for anybody doing video. Most people will accept poor quality video, but they will not accept poor quality sound. So always be careful when you're shooting your own internal videos that you keep the sound really clean. The other thing I think is really interesting about the video revolution is that the content is being consumed at the same time as other content. We're not grabbing a YouTube video, making it full screen. We're watching a video on a website, we're reading the content, we're learning as we go and listening to the content and bouncing back and forth. So we're consuming it on multiple medium at the same time. I'm going to show you, moving on to what makes a good video. A lot of people come to me and ask me, you know, how do we know what our content should be? And you got to really look at what your goals are. Again, it goes back to objectives that we talked about. You know, if your goal is to educate and inform, make sure you include that content. Be careful to not over promote an objective. Keep it to educating and letting people learn. I think a great video, and this is where your subject matter experts can really come into play, it really establishes credibility for an organization or the individuals to be able to share their knowledge. Video is a great tool to be able to understand and retain knowledge. And I think one of the most important things that you've got to keep in mind is that be respectful of the time limits. If you're going to promote to somebody, make it quick. You know, we're doing advertisements for 15 seconds, 30 seconds on the television, and we barely accept that. So if you're promoting something, be real quick about it. But if you're educating, give people time to actually absorb what you're teaching them. You can afford to be a little bit longer. I still think the 3 to 5 minute time frame is good. But if it's all video content, I would still try to keep it condensed. It's amazing what we can learn in just 30 seconds. I was going to talk about engaging video. If we move to the next slide. Oh, we got some words cut off here. When you're thinking about content, what you choose to show, I gave you the example of the role playing where we had actors playing in a role. That can work really well if your objective is show behavior or body language. The subject matter expert is great for showing credibility. The main thing in designing your content is to be really clear about your objective and be really clear about your target audience. One of the challenges is we often will say, I really like whiteboard videos. And I want a whiteboard video because that's what I like. But it's not about what you like. It's about whether the content is effective at getting the message across that you want. So I teach a course at George Brown on video for the web, and the first thing we do is watch a lot of video and assess whether we like them or don't like them. And again, it's not about whether we like them. If it does what we need it to do, it can be really effective. I'm going to show you an example here of an explainer video.
The technology is for all ages and all stages of life. So whatever you need and wherever you are, the internet never sleeps. And life as we know it will never be the same. But it's not all fun and games. The technology has brought with it some big challenges. Everywhere you look, new habits are popping up. And it's almost like we've forgotten how to connect face to face. We're doing things that put ourselves and others at risk. But we're hooked, and studies have shown that the technology we love so much has the same effect on our brains as any other addiction.
Another area that we do a lot in micro-learning is branching scenarios. And Craig, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, how long do you have? Branching scenarios, of course, are very, very common. It's certainly one of my favorites. And what makes them so great is that it really can take a learner into a situation and put the learner in the position where he or she has to make a decision that can be very similar to a real world decision. So in that respect, they're very interactive, and each decision will bring new challenges, and each challenge, depending on the decision made, will have consequences, and so that the learners can immediately see the ramifications of their actions. And so as an instructional designer, what we have to do initially is work with a subject matter expert to come up with what we call real world situations. And I think that's really important, and I say that a lot, because nothing will turn a learner off faster than being presented with a situation that isn't realistic. And as well as that, being presented with choices in a branching scenario that one or two of them are not realistic. And frequently it's tempting to say, okay, well, we'll just make one. Nobody would say yes to that. But I think that tends to turn learners off. I think you have to put yourself in the shoes of the learner and decide what would be plausible for that learner to make a choice, yes or no. Now, I mean, branching is one form of interaction, but it tends to be contrasted against linear. And what is linear? Well, those are simply some form of quizzing where you can check the learner's knowledge and retention, and you can get feedback immediately. And again, as I mentioned, the branching scenario places the learner in a real-world situation, and where they're scored on the quality of their decisions made. So let's dig down a little bit in terms of what that actually looks like and what are the benefits of it. And being able to quickly identify knowledge gaps helps people learn faster, and that transfers into better on-the-job results. And that can be stuff that you have an immediate reaction with, or it can be much more nuanced. And an example of a recent project, a Redwood project they were working on, is with called New Exporter with the Ministry of International Trade. And one of the objectives of that was to help people from Ontario go into different countries and different cultures and be comfortable with the cultural nuances of those locations. And for one of them, we did one for the country of India. And so we could take a learner right into that situation and set them up with some cultural education, but then put them into a situation where they were dealing with Indian colleagues and counterparts and potential customers, and give them choices which would either resonate well or poorly with their potential customers. So it's really is amazing that way. Now, there's a lot you can do to make your branching scenarios more interesting and more engaging for people. And just to step back a little bit, one thing that I think everybody has to keep in mind is that in our computers these days, we get really engaging stuff every minute of the day. And if you're not delivering something that is at least of that caliber with people, you're going to lose them, and quickly. And so there's a baseline, a price of admission that you should be really hitting. And one of the things is, if we go through these, is dialogue. And nobody wants to hear a narrator set things up for 3 minutes and then have people talk for 2 or 3 sentences. Get your material out there with a conversation that takes place between your characters, so people are learning through what they are saying and or feeling, and which leads into create emotion and mood. And we all have moods and emotions that impact how we learn and the actions we take. So don't be afraid to have your characters show frustration or anger. Avoid lengthy narration or dialogue. I feel like I'm doing that now. Try to keep these down to a minimum. Say maybe 3 sentences max, and always be sure to try engaging the learner at that point to make a choice so that you switch it up. When a learner makes a poor choice, explain why.
So basically like a coaching, right?
Like a coaching, yeah. I mean, you can sometimes leave it to the end and say you did this, and this wrong. But I think it's more effective that when a learner does something wrong, that they have an immediate feedback, and that can be reinforced later on down the line. And provide links, and that's really important. Provide links to resources that people can go to if they they might want to do a little bit of background learning before they re-engage in the scenario. And you can help when learners get off track. Sometimes they can go to a dead end, and then they can realize, hey, that wasn't the way to go, and then get coaching to go back and maybe try something different. And change it up as much as possible, and you'll keep your learners engaged.
That sounds great.
We have a few more. Do we have time?
We have time.
When possible, show as opposed to tell, and let your characters react as the situation unfolds. That helps the learner see the impact of good and bad choices. Make your choices and consequences realistic. Provide a path for learners to get back on track and talk to that and change it up. And so, okay, I think I've covered it.
Now, I just wanted to comment, Janine, earlier today, while we were prepping for our this webinar, you were talking about the impact of show rather than tell. Can you describe a little bit more again around that? Because I know you touched on it. But...
Whenever we're training and using video, and I work with a lot of organizations in this area, the challenge is if you tell people, it's like if you just got up in front of a meeting and if all we did was sit here silently and showed you the slides and we weren't really engaging with all of you, you could read the slides, you'd get something out of it. So it's what we add through the experience that really helps us learn and take away from them. And that idea that we can illustrate through, and I think the role-playing exercises, and Craig, you just touched on the same thing, having that dialogue and the realistic consequences to people's actions. When we see it for real, it means a lot more than if we tell you, like, if you do this, this is going to happen. When you see it play out and the response is as realistic as possible, all of a sudden that starts to resonate and it gets sort of stored in a different part of our brain as a recall, a memory, rather than a piece of information. So it's really powerful.
Now, what's also really powerful is when your micro-learning is searchable, if you can create that. So at some point, if I say, gee, how do I handle that disgruntled customer? I remember watching that video. I don't have to go back and watch an hour of learning. I just want that section. I want to zero in on that. So for a learner, that's way more effective for me because I'm more bound to use it. I'm more apt to go out and say, let me refresh my memory on this topic. I don't want to have to scroll through a whole hour of content. I just want to know this is what I want. This is what I need right now to help me do my job better.
And that's where strategy really comes into play, because I think the biggest mistake, somebody mentioned the DIY videos on YouTube. I love a good DIY video, but I'll sooner pick up a manual if that DIY video sets it up for 4 minutes at the beginning of the video. So I'm going to tell you how to install a toilet, and we're going to talk about all the things, right? And we lose it. So that idea of that strategy and getting that set out right off the bat, and that's key.
Right, and understanding your audience, because I'm hearing what you're saying about what you not wanting that setup, but then there are people who are going in to watch this, and that may be perfect for them, that they need that setup. So we always, bring it back to the audience. Now, I want to add on to what Lydia had mentioned about, the searchable library of content and how the learner can look at that. It has ramifications beyond that. And those ramifications are something we like to call at Redwood, called learning by walking around, where as a manager or supervisor, let's say you see an employee not fulfilling a role very well. I know that we had done this for another client where they actually had tablets and they had that library of stuff. And if they saw something that was happening on the floor, they had coachable, teachable moments in real time. So they were able to say, okay, here's what you were doing wrong. Watch this. This is going to explain exactly in a short period of time. So it's not taking the worker away from doing what they're doing. So if you can show them the right way within a 3-minute period of time or even less, the accomplishments that will happen as a result of that, it is great. So it's also about having a resource and for managers.
Great. And again, it's that whole interactivity and immersive environment that you're creating, which is really important as well. And people do learn better when they're learning in their actual own environment. So looking at that, Janine, what are your thoughts on what are all the advantages of micro-learning?
Yeah, and I think we've talked a lot about them through this program. The advantages, again, that the fact that it's small and consumable, that speaks volumes. People, one of the things that I'm always cognizant of when producing a video is keep the facts within one idea. People can't retain 10 facts on an idea. They can retain 3. So if you've got one concept and that one video, I'm talking about this from the standpoint of video. So my microlearning viewpoint is video in this case, but keeping it tight and consumable, the retention is huge. So you get a lot more from it. The advantage is it's also, it can be really cost effective to produce that way. Again, keeping the bigger picture in mind, you can use a lot of different tools, I think, to get that message across. Again, something that Craig touched on, the toolbox is huge if you take this approach. You can take different styles and you can address the learning to the needs of the viewer because people do consume in different ways.
Correct, and I know someone here is making a comment about gamification. Again, micro-learning for gamification, perfect if you have the right audience. Absolutely, it's a great way to learn, and it's a great way for them to retain and to go back and do it again. We've created games where you can go back and better your score if you want to, and people are doing it. And what clients of ours have been really surprised is they're going back at sometimes midnight, 2 in the morning, and they're replaying the game to up their score. No one has any issues with that because you're learning more, you're retaining that. If you're that keen to do that on your time, to play this game, to better your score, you're also absorbing and retaining a lot more of that information.
Well, it goes back to learning should be fun.
Exactly.
And not a chore.
And exactly. Not death by PowerPoint. Right?
There was another question here around what is high production values. So, Craig, can you just comment on that before we continue?
Well, yeah, certainly. Sometimes high production gets confused with expensive. And again, as Janine just said, we have this incredible toolbox now of digital means of communicating that are not expensive whatsoever. And but to achieve high production values, you should know how to use them and know how to use them effectively and know how to switch them up so they do create impact and they do tend to stand out from the kind of media that we're all watching all the time, or at least be at that level. I don't think you can be below it. Again, if the video starts out with somebody saying, okay, here we're going to teach you how to install the toilet today. Let's do an unboxing first. You're gone. You're done. And
step one, make certain you have an alternate toilet.
So I think that creativity now is really the value and knowledge of how people learn and how to combine the digital tools that we have effectively. That's what I mean by high production.
Wonderful.
And keeping your learning engaging as well. In a lot of cases, just don't talk at them, but get the learner involved. Have them, click on different things to get different results so that they're feeling engaged with the actual experience. So, anyone disadvantages to micro-learning? Janine, do you want to start with that?
Okay. I was giving this some thought. I knew you were going to hit me with this question. I thought, well, there's no disadvantage to micro-learning. It's a great way to go. But I think that, again, it goes down to strategy. And I'm going to keep plowing that back because if you embark on micro-learning without the big picture in mind, it can be really risky because it can be almost flippant. Mm-hmm. And that would be like the strategy and having that big picture objective in mind. A lot of people will say, we want to do this little piece. And I can walk into any company and sort of say, okay, well, I get this little piece, but I don't understand why or what. And if I don't understand and I don't matter in this case, the people who are learning need to understand. And so if you don't have that big picture, the micro aspect of it, and people saying, well, it has to be a minute or it has to be 2 minutes, you run that risk of suddenly not giving enough information. So you have to look at the whole thing. That would be the only caution.
It has to resonate with the audience.
Yes.
Always.
Always.
You have objectives that you want to accomplish, and you've been very clear that you want to increase X, or you want to do this, or you want the employee, but and it may be hard sometimes to make it resonate with the audience, but if you really think about that, you will have touch points with them in more meaningful ways. So around that. So I think we're going to talk more about the advantages. I'm going to recap.
And Craig, before we recap, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, certainly. I think it's a situation where if you had asked that question maybe 15 years ago, it would have been an answer where you could say, well, microlearning perhaps isn't appropriate for lengthy or complex or that type of learning task. But our lives have really changed in those ensuing years, and we're all trying to learn. I mean, if you're doing anything to keep up, you're learning all the time, and so our learning time becomes an issue. And so learning that gets chunked out into these nuggets where we can, and they're accessible and we can do them on our own time, I don't really see any situation where that isn't a benefit, even as just a support for longer and more formal training. So I'm a fan.
Absolutely. And I find myself, as I get older, I start to have the attention span of a gnat. And the way that the internet is set up, like I'm surfing around and I'm getting data from here, and then I'm jumping over here. So the way that we actually look at information is completely different than what it was even 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So, and then the millennials and people who are coming up into the workforce, the way they think about learning and how they've gotten information has completely changed. So you always have to think about the audience and how you're going to do that. I'm going to go next to the next slide, which you had a sneak peek at already, and just quickly recap what the advantages are of microlearning. So shorter seat time. Lydia, you had talked about this interesting example of one of the banks around seat time and the cost of that.
Yes, banks. No, because they tend to be so large, employee-wise, it's thousands and thousands of dollars a minute to pull someone off the job in order to get them to do mostly compliance learning. And sometimes the amount of learning they have to do, their employees have to do, is overwhelming. And we had found ways, for example, what has to change too is what is the corporate attitude towards the conversion of learning versus amount of time. So we're used to an hour-long course in a classroom, for example. That translates to maybe a 20-minute course online, maybe half an hour, depending on your content. So the mindset has to change. And we had an example of one client where they wanted a 15-minute long compliance course. We wrote it. It came out to 13 minutes. So they were thrilled because they said, whoa, that's 2 minutes less. That's thousands of dollars a minute of savings for the bank. And it went into legal, and legal looked at it and said, nope, you need 15 minutes. Go back and add 2 minutes. And there was really everything that needed to be said was in that 13 minutes. But the mindset had not adapted yet or adjusted to say, okay, this is great. My content is all there. All the points I need to hit are there. So why do I need to add this 2 other minutes, which may make me lose my learner? So those are things that have to work together hand in hand, and that's slowly turning, but it's not in every organization, and that's part of what you would need to champion in order to put effective learning in place.
Absolutely. So shorter seat time, and then quick creation and deployment. And we're probably all guilty of this, where we over obsess or we over analyze around how we're going to do this. Yes, we have to put the thought into it, but don't take 2 weeks to create one learning nugget that needed to go out immediately. Because you're going to miss that time when it's going to be most effective. So maybe sometimes we do have to sacrifice some of our, what we think, and, we need to have the right image, or this color is not right. Think about that and make certain that it's, just in time. We need the learning nuggets. You can update them fast or modify them because you're not going into a complete course and having to create all of this stuff. You can more easily do this. Advantage is that microlearning helps you create an agile library of assets. And we talked about that earlier in the presentation around the importance of that and how that really is something that is advantageous to you. It allows you to create flexible learning paths because you have that library of assets. So you see an employee and these are the issues that the employee needs to address. Well, you just from that library, oh, boop, 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 here's your learning path, do these, in sequence or however you want to lay it out, but it's targeted, it's custom learning, and we're hearing more and more about that. And this is just a more, subtler, like interesting way to do that. Again, I had mentioned targeted based on need. It allows the employee, so remember the model that was shown about, we know it, we own it too, finally we live it. It allows the employee to retain information. You're targeting them on a consistent manner where it's over time, not just, oh, here's this training program and then, go and forget about it. Okay, so finishing up, and Lydia had asked the question about disadvantage. And really, I don't think that there's much a disadvantage of microlearning, but here's the thing. There are things that need to be in place for it to be effective, The first thing you need is the plan. And we talked about that earlier, putting the micro in your macro. If you don't have the macro, you're going to be all scattered and then you won't have any cohesion and you're not going to get the results that you want. The second thing is, which is perhaps one of the more critical, is that you need senior sponsor buy-in. Your senior leadership needs to buy into the idea of that because otherwise, it may get dropped in the next budget or they may not see it as being important. So you have to do a job of ensuring that they understand what this is going to do, what the plan is, and why they need to buy in. And in our experience, they're going to buy in because this is for the good of the organization. It increases the things that they want to do. And also it makes them look good. You need champions within the organization because you can't do it on your own. You can't be the person in the learning department and all of a sudden you're expected to roll out, 10 pieces of learning nuggets a month. And that's where it came back to, I think I saw some of the comments about, employee videos, using those people, use the subject matter experts in your organization. And again, it doesn't have to be video. It could be you interview them. It could be an audio file, or you do a webinar, like a mini webinar or a mini catch up around getting the experiences of these individuals. The next thing is you are going to need resources and support, and that goes again into champions. And around that, it's not something that, we're surprised that we have to spend money on something. You're going to need that. You're going to need more people because it is about building this learning nugget library. The next thing, you need sustainability. And this is, again, going back to that model that people stop at, okay, we've created awareness, so people understand what it's all about. Think of building that library and how you're going to roll it out in a more sustainable way, and think so that you're touching them, you're hitting them with something maybe a couple of times a month, or really depending what the need is. If you're, for example, rolling out a new strategy, you're going to want to create your learning nuggets, and you're going to have more, and then you can, in the initial phases of that strategy, because they really need to understand that. And then you can actually target and say, well, we're going to focus on this over this time, and I'm going to create this branching scenarios. We want to ensure that everyone else is done. Now, talking about sustainability again, do not do it in such a way that it's going to make people hate you because you're being demanding and you're asking, you need to do this for me because we need to get these things out. Think about where the energy is within the organization. So obviously when it's year-end review, yeah, don't burden people with that, and don't to create things, and don't burden people to actually have to learn during that time. The hosting system, again, is going to be critical, because when you're thinking about a learning library that has video, it's this rich media stuff. You don't want to think about it in, a typical learning management system, because that system is very linear in the approach of it. And think about it in terms of something that's called a learning experience platform. It enhances the typical learning management system that you have, but learning experience platforms, they act more like TV channels, and set up learning content, videos, and programs more that like you see on Netflix or YouTube, and then you can slice and dice or do whatever you want it. But that's going to be a topic, I think, for another webinar around that concept.
Great. Well, thank you to our panel, Janine, Lee, and Craig. We really appreciated having you on. I hope you're ready to jump on the microlearning bandwagon.